We're coming down the home stretch. When we thought about who would be the right person to kind of wrap our day up for us, Lorcan Dempsey's name came, right to the top of our minds. And plus, he owed me one. He and I had recently worked on an issue of Portal, and we had been in conversation, so we were able to reach out to him and talk. But Lorcan is Vice President and Chief Strategist of OCLC Research. His many influential contributions to the professional literature are widely recognized, as is his long-running blog, which was recently edited into a book entitled "The Network Reshapes the Library." He's the only person I know whose blog has been made into a book. He has received the National Federation of Advanced Information Services highest honor, the Miles Conrad Award, and has twice received the Alsit's Presidential Citation. Lorcan is one of our profession's big thinkers, and we cannot think of a better person to offer his thoughts in a wrap-up of our day. Welcome, Lorcan.
Thank you for that. It's definitely downhill from there. Reflective discussion. What I've done is I've got some observations about the particular areas. I did try and weave in this morning some of the comments that were made through some of the sessions, but then I had to load the presentation at lunchtime, so I couldn't do anything after that. Couple of preludes. First one about Jim himself. He didn't tell that story today, thankfully. I did think I ought to mention, coming from OCLC, Jim is now a member of our board and very strong advocate for libraries and for research libraries in that context. And because Jim is on our board, I am wearing my interview suit today. The second point that I wanted to make is I don't think Jim gets enough credit, frankly. That's a bit of a weasel word, isn't it, frankly? I don't think Jim gets enough credit for how much he has done for us all at considerable personal cost. And quite a bit of embarrassment, I think. But he really has raised the bar for bad library humor. He really has given the rest of us the freedom to tell terrible jokes at conferences. So I won't mention the pig with the wooden leg.
I will tell that for a price.
You will tell that for a price. Well, it'd be more like you won't tell it for a price. How much would it cost to keep you quiet? I can speak without power and can speak without point, but I usually do speak with PowerPoint. So I will. I'll continue with the PowerPoint. I was interested in the title of the earlier remarks. Relationship between PowerPoint and Excel is that you dream in PowerPoint and you have nightmares in Excel. Okay. So Prelude number 2. I did think it might be worth beginning by saying a few things about some general trends in libraries. We heard earlier about Big Shift. We have long revolutions, whatever. So there is a sort of major rebalancing long-term underway. And I thought it might be worthwhile saying a few things about some ways of characterizing that. One way of characterizing it is, historically, we tend to think about the user in the life of the library. So we think about the library, we think about collections, we think about services, we think about building, and we think about how the user comes to those, uses those, is helped using those. Very much in the last few years, we've had to think about the library in the life of the user. We have to start with research workflows, with learning needs. We have to start with the user, wherever the user is, and then think about how to relate the library to those needs. The discussion about digitization, Greg Cram's discussion about digitization, very much how do we get these things into the hands of users. Later discussion about researcher workflows, how do we get the library into the life of the user rather than imagine building the library and having the user come into the library. And I think this has lots of implications. Some joking about libraries' desire for control, librarians' desire for control. Historically, libraries were sort of bureaucratic organizations in the sense, if you think about what a bureaucracy is something that has reasonably well-known goals, and a lot of your effort goes into reproducing the means or reorganizing the means towards those goals. So what libraries did was, we want very good technical services, we want very good public services, we work on the means, we improve the means because the library is relatively stable and we understand the goals. If you contrast that with an enterprise, where an enterprise is more entrepreneurial, the goals change and you have to reshape the means to meet those changing goals. And a lot of the discussion that we've had today, it seems to me, relates to that. So what sorts of decisions do we now make about space? It was clear what space was there for. Space was where you put the collections. We organized our spaces around collections and helped libraries interpret those collections, have access to those collections. Now, we're thinking about organizing space in such a way, reorganizing it around user experiences, making choices about space in different ways, and having to make choices about space. We're having to make choices about services, which services to offer. Choices about expertise, going back to the workforce discussion, what types of expertise are needed? It's no longer a given that you have a set of expertises. You need this set of expertises which are produced in a professional school called a library school. What you have now is having to make choices about a set of expertises that are required to actually bring the library into the life of the user in sensible or effective ways. And that's a big change in terms of thinking because it requires strategy. Strategy are the bets that you make on the future, and you're having to make bets on the future now. You're not following an agreed path. You're not refining something that's already understood. You're making bets. You're making choices about how to use resources, how to move resources around, how to change resources, how to do things in a different way. The library was very infrastructure-oriented. It was a building with collections in it, with systems, and the work revolved around buildings, collections, and systems. What has now happened is a lot of that infrastructure is moving up in the network. You want to share that infrastructure. You want to share it with groups of colleagues. You want to potentially use network services for some types of things. And we've seen a lot of this moving up in the network as we share infrastructure. It's very difficult, though, and a lot of the discussion earlier was about some of the difficulty of that. Collective collection is sort of moving collections up, but really, how do we do that? So focus on infrastructure. That infrastructure is changing. But really, the attention is now shifting to some extent away from that infrastructure, or thinking about how we manage that infrastructure differently, because the priority is engagement. It's engagement with new forms of learning and research. It's engagement with the institution. It's engagement with the practices that are emerging on campuses so that you can create new value. And that means that you potentially need to have certain new specialist skills, certain new ways of engaging, ways of doing things. So a shift from infrastructure to engagement, a requirement to do infrastructure maybe in different ways, calling forth new collaborative arrangements which are difficult, and calling forward new skills, new ways of interacting from an engagement point of view. And then in terms of collections, one of the things in the digital environment which is quite interesting is that in the print environment you gather collections and you interpret them for users. Users come in, they interact with the collections, they go away, they create stuff goes into the publishing environment, it comes back. So the interaction with that whole scholarly life cycle of the library is at certain points. In a digital environment, the engagement with that life cycle can be at multiple points. So you may want to, as we've discussed, interact around data, interact around new workflows, interact around tools, interact around copyright, interact around publishing decisions, interact around gathering preprints, interact around promotion, interact around researcher reputation, interact around a much wider range. Am I making funny noises here? No, just I'm getting this sort of funny. Yeah.
The microphone back.
All right. Okay. Okay. We'll keep going. We'll keep going. Okay. Could somebody repeat that last sentence back to me? Okay, interact. Yeah, so you got that. Okay, so it means, though, that the library is very much more engaged with the full creative range of activity, not just with collecting final materials, final outputs, but engaged with a fuller creative cycle. So that really shifts quite a bit of the focus, and we're in the middle of all of these shifts, and this obviously causes some tension. So, thinking about a variety of the things that were discussed earlier, not in the same order, workforce. I was listening to the BBC a while ago, and there was this program on about architects, and there was an architect on bemoaning the fact that there were fewer employment opportunities for architects because architecture companies were employing all these other people. And it just struck me, it was exactly like some of the conversations we're having about libraries. So the point that they made was, well, the employment opportunity for architects is not as great as it was because as companies engage in the projects they're looking at one stage, architects would do most of the work. Architects would be called upon to do the full array of things that the company had to do to complete its input into an assignment. But this despondent architect was saying, now, the company had project managers who had a sort of generic background, not necessarily great architectural knowledge. Engineers had come in much more because of the nature of some of the buildings that were being looked at. Actual builders, quantity surveyors, others were coming in. Placemakers, I don't know what placemakers are, to be honest. Somebody else might, but apparently architecture firms have them. Placemakers, developers, whole range of other people. And if you think about the library, I mean, we have sort of similar thing. And listening to this morning's discussion, we do think of project managers, developers, programmers, but then also if you think about the range of things that we talk about the library doing, publishers, data scientists, scholars, marketing, legal, policy issues. Big interest recently, Deanna mentioned, in ethnography, ethnographers. Several libraries have anthropologists on staff. And if you think about the shift that I mentioned earlier, this is sort of natural enough because you're thinking about reaching out in different ways. You're thinking about appealing to communities in different ways, interacting with them in different ways, which calls forth a different set of skills. So it seems to me that the trend that we're seeing is sort of a natural one, which doesn't mean it's easy to manage or easy to deal with, but it is a natural one and one that will continue. In this type of environment, then you do have issues about how to create and scale learning where you have different people coming together. One of the I wrote a piece for ACRL recently about I was asked to write about consortia in a particular in the 75th anniversary volume. New Roles for the Road Ahead, with that memorable title, New Roles for the Road Ahead. But I wrote a short piece about consortia. And it seemed to me that consortia have been remarkably long-lived. Now, some of them are subscale, some of them not quite purpose. You're seeing some shifting, some new ones are coming up. shared print is creating a lot of new activity. One of the primary values, though, of consortia, and one of the reasons they are long-lived, is that they allow libraries to scale learning. They are places where people can consort, can talk, can pool uncertainty, can discuss what's happening, can get outside of the confines of their institution to scale learning. But the importance, I think, of scaling learning, of allowing different people coming together to understand the organization and so on, is something that clearly becomes more important in this type of context. Curse of knowledge is an economic concept I came across recently, which now explains everything to me. So apparently the curse of knowledge is a person's predisposition to imagine that everybody else knows the same as they do. So, I imagine that you know the same as I do. So for a presenter, for a teacher, for a salesperson, this sort of is an issue as they're doing things. It seems to me librarians suffer especially from the curse of knowledge because, the symptoms of this are that you might talk in jargon, you might talk in a more abstract way than somebody can understand, that you talk in a way that doesn't necessarily map onto what people are expecting. One of the big issues about having people from different backgrounds, from different contexts, is it's a sort of corrective to that issue, because you begin to have to not just explain yourself to your constituency, but to your colleagues, and this creates a better prepared organization to interact. But thinking about the diversity of expertise in an institution, it seems to me it better prepares it then to interact with the broader institution. I put in, have I emerged yet? Because I find it quite amusing. All the emerging posts, half the adverts that you see now have strategy or strategic in the title, and then quite a few have emerging. And I sort of have this sense of butterfly or something emerging, even a caterpillar, sort of the emerging technology librarian fluttering in. That's have you emerged? Have you emerged yet? But it sort of seems like it's a ghettoization of a particular issue. It's putting it over here. That's emerging technology, and here's all the boring stuff that's never going to emerge over here. So I don't know. Just thinking about skills, it occurred to me. Anne Kenny said one of the phrases she used was the resilience of what librarianship is all about. And even though I didn't quite fully necessarily understand it in the way that she meant it because of the curse of knowledge, I did feel that this is potentially quite important, that there is institutional, professional practices, values that are important around the institution of librarianship, separate from then a set of skills that one might have that changes. And again, especially if you're thinking about the library as an enterprise, you're thinking about new forms of engagement, you're thinking about engaging with creation activities, this calls forward a range of new skills and abilities. But what is it that's particular or special about that institutional, professional value, those cores? And I put this picture up a couple of years ago. I participated in this symposium workshop at UNC Chapel Hill about the future of library schools, iSchools. And they took the relatively modest date of 2050 to look out to. But what I was struck with during those discussions was really the enormous conflict that you had here between, on the one hand, bootstrapping a library school into this future, and on the other hand, this conflict, if you like, between the institutional issues around a library and the desire to train people that Facebook or Google or whoever would employ. And really, really sort of a challenge. So in terms of thinking about what it is that one wants to have taught in these schools, or what one produces, I think really, a lot of thinking there. Skills, happening, that's changing, but what is the profession, the institution, the whatever? I thought the executive MBA example was interesting in that context. Innovation, funding, innovation. For some reason, I chose grey as the color here. I don't know whether that's indicative of anything. So this is a picture by Horace Dejew, a Simcoe. He's a consultant, and I found it very striking when I first saw it. So he's talking about what people normally call innovation or whatever. So you've got novelty, and that's new. You know, it's just so the choice of gold as a color for the iPhone is the example he gives. Then you have creations. You know, what's valuable? What, you know, it's valuable. Then he has invention, which he says is unique. But then right at the end, he has innovation. So innovation has to be all of the other things, but it also has to actually be useful. And this is something we should remember, that we talk a lot about innovation, but how much of it is useful? So innovation is useful. And I think the examples he gives are actually quite interesting. The iPhone pricing model, Google's revenue model, the Ford production system, Walmart's store design, Amazon's logistics. If you think about these things, these aren't shiny penny types of things. They're not, you know, wonderful gizmos. They're institutional innovation. They're innovation around process. They're innovation that really changes the way something happens to create new value, to create new connections. There are changes in the sort of architecture of the organization, changes in the ways in which parts of an organization relate to each other to do things. They're sort of fundamental institutional innovations, and I thought that was quite interesting. If we think about library activity, if we think about funded library activity, interesting to sort of think about how many things actually move out along those circles, move out along into the genuinely system-wide useful element. Now, before I came to work for OCLC, I'm young enough still to be able to remember that. I worked for JISC in the UK, an organisation that provides infrastructure services to higher education. However, so I was responsible for their informational spend, their informational activity, data centres, national site licensing, a range of national infrastructure information issues. However, we also had a large R&D investment, large project-based funding activity. So we funded, you know, we had calls and we funded a lot of project-based work in sort of digital library-related activity, you know, the sort of thing that you're very familiar with. So the main thing about this was it made me very popular. That was the one thing. So you know, one understands the personal dynamic of these things. You know, you have a lot of money, whatever. But the interesting thing about it is, how do projects move along this? How do projects move along this? You know, from being new or interesting or valuable to actually being useful. How do you connect an institutional development, an institutional initiative, with a system-wide development or initiative? And it's interesting to consider, you know, what we've done successfully there and what has remained within the institution. And I do think that's an area where some serious investigation would be quite interesting. Now, by chance, I came across this video a while ago. So this is a sociologist here at Columbia, and he's talking about innovation in quite an interesting way. So he says, the received wisdom about innovation is that it arises from some recombination of existing and novel resources that bring about something new. So that's part of the story, but it's the least interesting part. So that's the stuff that's sort of near the center. You know, that's the new novel gold iPhone, you know, type stuff. The real achievement, and I think this should be the basis of the basic goal of the academy, is figuring out how to mobilize new ideas so that they stabilize new knowledge within larger networks of interaction outside the academy. So the example he uses is Pasteur. You know, so Pasteur works on pasteurization in the laboratory, and it's by interacting with these networks of physicians, of farmers, of others, that he actually stabilizes the idea of pasteurization and moves it into general practice. So the argument is that you have to develop solutions to problems, but then you make them stick by connecting them to larger networks, by connecting them to networks of interaction, by connecting them to networks of different players who are working together to solve your problems. Who is the most successful person in the digital library space? Herbert van de Sompel. So Herbert is an inveterate networker. He works very hard. He did specific library stuff. It doesn't really work. So now he does webby stuff. He interacts with the webby community. He tries to stabilize what he does in interaction networks of scientists, of the web community, of other people. Linked data mentioned earlier. The linked data work that's being done is trying to be stabilized by interacting with Google, by doing a variety of other things. You have to move things up and out into the networks that are important to sustain it and to carry it forward. And I think this is actually something quite difficult for individual institutions to do. If you think about libraries, again, how do we create then systemic change? How do we move things into these bigger networks and out of just the institution? How do we create institutional innovation? That means that we change the way things work. So going back to the discussion earlier, and maybe it was Jim that said, you want to see real strategy in action, follow the budget. Okay, you want to see, sharing stuff is very important. How much money gets moved into shared environments and out of individual environments? What we have now is we have, somebody, maybe Deanna mentioned that we create all these new organizations. So we want donuts, so we have donut maker. We want bagels, we have bagel maker. We want bread, we have bread maker. In the end, you have this kitchen full of all these 501c3s that you're each paying $10,000 to make donuts, bagels, whatever, rather than, a bread factory or something. But the issue is, from a strategic point of view, can you see the money following into those shared environments? If you want shared services, money has to follow into shared environments. And those networks of interaction then, universities, scholars, providers, working for OCLC, one of the interesting things about the whole innovation digital discussion is it quite often doesn't include those people upon whom you might rely to deliver a variety of services. There's here's a donut maker, and we built it ourselves. Here's a bagel maker, and we built it ourselves. This becomes important when you think about what's happening, more generally. So collective collection mentioned a few times. You just think about print, shared print. We're seeing this sort of multi-scalar collaborative environment emerge where libraries are beginning to do things at a variety of scales. Now, this is natural enough as things begin, but then the coherence question is, how do we begin to sort out where to actually invest time and energy and do things? How do these things begin to relate together? Do we invest in all of these areas? And if you think about the range of things that we do, we have this multi-scalar question coming up in a variety of contexts. Planning and strategy, the Harvard Business Review article that was mentioned earlier quotes Henry Mintzberg. Various of you will be familiar with Mintzberg. He has this very nice idea of emergent strategy. So what he says is you have deliberate strategy, the document comes down from the top, this is what we're going to do. Quite often that becomes unrealized strategy because, we didn't quite get to it this year. But at the same time, the environment is changing, things are happening, and you have an emergent strategy. You have what you actually begin to do in response to that changing environment. And the realized strategy, the strategy that actually happens, is some combination of emergent strategy and deliberate strategy. If you want to influence emergent strategy, well, then you come back to the importance of vision. So if an organization has a vision, if an organization has a clear pattern of expectation, if an organization has a culture that is oriented around particular values, then the emergent strategy will tend to flow in particular ways and interact positively with the deliberate strategy. And the quite nice statement in the original article where they talked about this is strategy formation walks on 2 feet, one deliberate and one emergent. The importance of emergent strategy signals the importance of culture, vision, shared patterns of expectation. And that's because everything is changing. I put this picture in because it just shows how things are changing. This is from University of Utrecht, showing a range of tools and services that now emerge to help people with scholarly workflow. Have you digested that? This is one part of it blown up a bit, and quite interesting. Goes through looking at various things. The two at the bottom are quite interesting. The range of Google tools, but then also digital science at the bottom. The range of tools being Symplectic, ReadCube, Altmetrics, Digital Science. Very interesting company, associated with big publisher, obviously, but interesting company. I'll skip this in the interests of time, although it's quite subtle and quite interesting. So information policy, green. I won't say anything about St. Patrick. So quite interesting in the general discussion, and going back to the picture I just showed, reputation management, big focus on thinking about assessment, the organization. If you look at publishing, publishers developing scholarly workflow. So a whole range of activities here. We focus on open access as an appropriate direction and focus. But if you look at how publishing is changing, if you look at how scholarly workflows are changing, if you look at how the way research is done is changing, if you look at the emphasis on assessment, ranking, the importance of publication in that, the importance of citation in that, and you think about, what's going on here. One thing to reflect, which I'm just surprised we don't hear more often about, is in one way the Academy has outsourced to some extent reputation management to the publishing apparatus. And this is a huge issue, and one that if things are going to change in a meaningful way, that has also to change. But when you look, a whole range of activity going on there, which is quite interesting. I thought there might be more discussion about this, concentration and diffusion. If you think about what's happening in the network environment, what's happening is much of our network life is organized by large digital platforms and aggregators. How many people in the room have ever used Facebook? How many people have ever used Google Mail? Okay. So even warm, cuddly things, the things we think of as warm and cuddly, and we might use them, Kickstarter, Etsy. So what these basically organizations are, large digital platforms that create infrastructure, concentrate infrastructure, and then you have apps, or you have, with Etsy, you have individual merchants. With Kickstarter, you have individual entrepreneurs. So there's a concentration and a diffusion. The concentration allows some creativity to flourish among the entrepreneurs with Kickstarter, among the merchants with Etsy. But they go hand in hand. They go hand in hand. In a library context, we don't have those large platforms. We talk about them, we talk about interoperability, but we only have a few large platforms. They are important because they are the sensors, they are the gateways. Sensors spelled S-E-N-S-O-R-S. They measure data, they measure traffic, they know what's going on. So a whole set of very important issues around this that wasn't really discussed, so I'll pass on. Advocacy, very important, and thinking about the role of the library in relation to creation. So the library really is an advocate for creators, people who are creating material, and those creators need access to materials to help them create. So I think the role of the library, stepping out of the twilight, whatever the phrase was, in terms of thinking about their role supporting creation in their campuses, means supporting people who want to use things to create and advising, giving support to creators. So almost on time. Finishing. I thought I'd put up this is the penultimate. I thought I'd put up my favorite quote about libraries. I had a slide already. But the point is, the library is a place that has no agenda other than allowing people to invent their own agendas, I think is particularly strong. And it's a sort of ironic statement because to do that you need an agenda. You have to have an agenda to be able to have the ability not to have an agenda other than to support your user having an agenda, if you see what I mean. So I think it's actually even stronger than it appears to be. So I am going to finish with a poem. There was a young librarian named Jim who drank life to the very brim. From his base in Columbia, he was the scourge of Kumbaya. It's not easy. Not retired, his real influence will now begin. Thank you.
Thank you all. This was a wonderful day. Enjoy the snow.